The first warning came in a white envelope taped to Ethan Walker's front door. His HOA claimed he owed $18,000 for violations he never committed. Then the president, Marjorie Blake, arrived in a pink suit and told him his family home could be taken. But when the HOA treasurer suddenly resigned, one hidden truth began to surface. Community money was missing, and someone's private mansion had been quietly transformed. Subscribe, because what happened next shook the entire neighborhood. The envelope was taped to Ethan Walker's front door with a strip of blue painter's tape, hanging there in the salt wind like a warning nobody wanted to touch. By sunrise, 3 neighbors had already slowed their cars in front of his house, staring at it through fogged windows before driving away without waving. Even the gulls above Seabrook Cove seemed quieter that morning, circling over the gray water, while Ethan stood barefoot on the porch, coffee cooling in his hand, reading the words printed across the top. Final notice of HOA enforcement. His daughter Lily was inside at the kitchen table, surrounded by old photographs of wooden boats, yellowed newspaper clippings, and one cracked picture frame holding a black and white photo of Ethan's father with a hand-built skiff behind him. She had been working on her school history exhibit for weeks, carefully labeling each piece of the Walker family's boat-building past, not knowing that the house in those photographs was now being judged by strangers who called it an eyesore. Ethan looked from the letter to the porch beneath his feet, the same porch boards his father had salvaged from a burned fishing pier 20 years ago. And for a moment, he could almost hear the old man's voice telling him to measure twice, cut once, and never let anyone shame honest work. The fine was $18,000. The violations were listed in neat, bloodless language. Recycled wood porch inconsistent with neighborhood standards. Old rowboat visible from street-facing property line. Unauthorized workshop structure. Excessive nautical materials, and general decline of community appearance. Ethan read the words twice, then a third time, each pass tightening something in his chest. The letter gave him 14 days to pay. 14 days before the Seabrook Cove Homeowners Association would begin placing a lien on his property. Not a warning, not a meeting, a countdown. The Walker house sat at the end of Salt Lantern Road, where the pavement narrowed, the pines leaned toward the water, and the air always smelled faintly of cedar, engine oil, and low tide. It was not polished like the newer vacation homes on the ridge, with their black-framed windows and silent security cameras. It had weathered shingles, a patched roof, a workbench behind the garage, and a small wooden boat resting beside the yard under a canvas tarp. To Ethan, every dent and stain meant survival. To the HOA, apparently, it meant damage. A black SUV rolled to a stop at the edge of his gravel drive just after 8. By the next morning, someone had dragged a rusted chain across the private road to the boat launch. A red HOA notice hung from the lock, snapping in the sea wind. And Ethan's truck headlights caught the words just as the fog began lifting off the cove. Behind the chain, the old wooden dock stretched into the gray water like a place already condemned. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Walker stood 10 yards from the shoreline his family had used for generations and felt like a trespasser. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. Lily, silent in the passenger seat with her backpack on her lap and a shoebox of old photographs balanced carefully against her knees. She had wanted to stop at the dock before school to take one more picture for her history exhibit. One clean sunrise shot of the place where her grandfather launched his first skiff. Instead, she stared at the locked chain, her face small and pale in the dashboard glow. Ethan said nothing at first because if he opened his mouth too quickly, the anger would come out in a way a 12-year-old should not have to hear. He only stepped out into the cold morning air, walked to the notice, and read Marjorie Blake's signature at the bottom like a stain that kept spreading. The HOA office sat beside the mail center, a tidy white building with blue shutters and a brass sign that made Seabrook Cove look more official than it had any right to be. Ethan arrived there just after dropping Lily at school, still smelling of salt, sawdust, and gasoline from the boatyard. Inside, the floors were polished, the air smelled like lemon cleaner, and framed photographs of perfect houses lined the hallway, every lawn trimmed, every porch staged, every window reflecting the kind of money that never had to explain itself. Behind the front desk, Nora Ellis looked up from her computer with tired eyes and a hand resting too close to the drawer beneath her keyboard. Ethan placed the fine notice on the counter and asked to see the records behind the $18,000. Nora opened her mouth, then looked past him. The office door behind her had swung open without a sound. Marjorie Blake stood there in another immaculate pink suit, this one a softer shade, almost rose-colored, her white hair smooth against her jaw, her expression calm in a way that made the room feel colder. She did not ask why he was there. She simply walked to the counter, picked up the notice, and set it back down with 2 fingers, as if even touching his problem might dirty her hands. She told him the board was not required to justify enforcement costs to residents already in violation. The phrase landed clean and sharp, practiced enough to sound like policy, and cruel enough to sound personal. Ethan held her stare and asked why the road to the dock had been chained. Marjorie's eyes flicked briefly to Nora, then returned to him. Continued disruption, she said, could lead to temporary suspension of community access privileges, including the boat launch. Ethan reminded her that his father used that road before Seabrook Cove existed, before the mail center, before the brass sign, before anyone had invented violations for old boats and honest wood. Marjorie leaned forward slightly, her perfume cutting through the lemon cleaner, and told him history was not an exemption. Nora kept her face lowered, but Ethan saw the tension in her shoulders. She looked like someone listening to a fire spread behind a closed door. When Marjorie slid a folder across the desk, Ethan caught a glimpse of other names printed on the tabs. Harlan, Finch, McAvoy, Price. Not just his. More fines, more notices, more families being squeezed. He left the office with no records, no answers, and the sharp feeling that Marjorie was not enforcing rules. She was building pressure. By noon, the town seemed to prove him right. At the hardware store, Ethan found Mrs. Harlan, a widow in her 70s, standing in the garden aisle with a packet of sunflower seeds in her hand, and tears she refused to let fall. Her yard had been fined because the sunflowers near her porch had grown too tall and blocked the approved street view. Outside the post office, retired firefighter Ray McAvoy showed Ethan a violation letter folded into the pocket of his denim jacket. His American flag, the one he had flown since his last day on the job, was 4 inches wider than the new HOA standard allowed. Near the school pickup lane, a young father Ethan barely knew admitted he had been fined because his children left bicycles beside the front steps during dinner. None of it felt random anymore. The violations were small, human things, the kind of evidence that people actually lived inside their homes. Flowers, flags, kids' bikes, a boat waiting to be repaired. Marjorie was turning ordinary life into billable offenses, and every frightened resident had paid quietly because fighting back cost more than surrender. Ethan drove home through the narrow roads of Harbor Pines with the windows down, letting the cold air keep him steady. And one question circled in his head with the rhythm of the tires on the pavement. If the HOA needed money this badly, where had the real money gone? Inside the HOA office, long after Ethan left, Nora waited until the building fell quiet. She locked the front door, pulled the blinds halfway closed, and opened the financial software with hands that refused to stay still. The first strange charge led to another, then another, each line dressed in the language of community improvement. Clubhouse roof repairs, common area heating upgrade, meeting room marble flooring, hospitality lounge cabinetry. Over 18 months, the total passed $220,000. and Nora sat there under the flat fluorescent light, feeling the blood drain from her face. Seabrook Cove had no clubhouse, no common heating system, no meeting room with marble floors, no hospitality lounge. The association had paid for rooms that did not exist. She printed nothing. Printing left a trail. Instead, she opened invoice attachments and took photos with her phone, the tiny camera clicks sounding impossibly loud in the empty office. One vendor address matched a luxury interior design firm in Portland. Another listed custom stonework. Another showed delivery instructions to Harbor Ridge, the hill above the cove where Marjorie's white house watched over the community like a lighthouse with no mercy. Nora zoomed in on one invoice and saw a handwritten note beside the delivery line. Side entrance, Blake residence. The door opened behind her. Nora froze with the mouse still under her palm. Marjorie stepped into the office slowly, her heels making soft, precise sounds against the floor. She did not look surprised. She looked disappointed, as if Nora had failed some quiet test of obedience. On the desk, Marjorie placed a cream-colored envelope. It was unsealed. Inside were photographs of Nora's son, Caleb, unloading crates at the harbor, his college sweatshirt visible beneath his work jacket. There was also a printed copy of a scholarship committee email, the kind of email no stranger should have had. Marjorie did not threaten loudly. She did not need to. She only reminded Nora that recommendations, reputations, and opportunities were fragile things in a small community, especially for young men trying to leave it. Nora's throat tightened so badly she could barely breathe. Her son had worked every weekend since sophomore year, saving for college, smiling through exhaustion because he believed hard work opened doors. Now Marjorie was holding one of those doors by the handle. Nora closed the financial window while Marjorie watched, then nodded the way terrified people nod when they need the predator to leave. Marjorie took the envelope back, smoothed the front of her pink suit, and walked out without raising her voice once. For several minutes, Nora sat completely still. Then, with tears running silently down her face, she opened the drawer beneath her keyboard, pulled out a small silver USB drive, and plugged it into the computer. She copied only part of the files, not enough to feel safe, but enough to prove she had not imagined it. Her hands shook so violently that she nearly dropped the drive when the transfer finished. She hid it inside the lining of her purse, behind a loose seam she had meant to repair for months. That afternoon, while Ethan repaired a cracked oar behind his workshop, Lily came home with a boy named Mason walking beside her. He was small for his age, serious-eyed, and carried a notebook full of stories his grandmother had told him about the old fishing village before the gates, before the fines, before Marjorie Blake turned neighbor against neighbor. Lily set her shoebox of photographs on Ethan's workbench and said they had found people who remembered when the dock road belonged to everyone. Mason added that his grandmother had a picture of a town picnic on that very road, long before the HOA claimed it was private. Ethan looked at the two kids standing in the sawdust and afternoon light, both of them too young to understand how dangerous truth could become once powerful people started losing control. Then his phone buzzed. An unknown number. One message. No greeting, no explanation. Just a photo of a financial ledger on a computer screen, blurred at the edges but clear enough for him to read the first line. Community hospitality upgrades, $27,840. Blake residence. The meeting room lights flickered once before Marjorie Blake stepped to the podium, and for a breath, every face in Seabrook Cove looked pale and unfinished under the fluorescent glow. Ethan noticed the empty chair beside the financial table first, then the microphone lying on its side, then Nora Ellis standing near the back wall with her purse clutched to her ribs like she was holding something breakable inside it. The room was full, but no one sounded like neighbors anymore. They sounded like people waiting for a sentence to be read. Marjorie wore the same color she always wore when she wanted control, a pink suit sharp enough to cut the air around her, her white hair tucked neatly against her jaw, her smile calm and polished for the crowd. Behind her, a projection screen showed the words, Seabrook Cove Community Improvement Plan, framed by photos of clean sidewalks, flower beds, and a shining clubhouse that Ethan was almost certain did not exist. Families packed the folding chairs. Mrs. Harlan sat near the front with a cane across her knees, her sunflower find folded in her lap. Ray McAvoy stood against the wall, arms crossed over his old fire department jacket. Lily and Mason sat in the back, with a brown school archive folder between them, whispering over something they had found but had not shown him yet. Marjorie began with a soft voice, the kind people use when they are about to ask for money and pretend it is for everyone's good. She spoke about rising maintenance demands, neighborhood standards, long-term value, and a community vision that required sacrifice. Then the number appeared on the screen. A 35% increase in annual dues, effective immediately, with additional enforcement funds allocated for non-compliant properties. A low sound moved through the room, not quite anger yet, more like a wave pulling back before it breaks. Ethan watched people do silent math in their heads, watched shoulders sink, watched young parents look at each other as if deciding what bill would have to wait. He stood before he could talk himself out of it. The chair legs scraped against the floor loud enough to make the front row turn. His voice stayed steady, but every word carried the weight of the locked dock road, the $18,000 fine, and Lily's face in the truck that morning. He asked where the improvements were, where the clubhouse roof was, where the meeting room marble was, where the hospitality lounge was that had supposedly cost thousands of dollars to upgrade. For the first time all night, Marjorie did not answer immediately. She looked down at him from the podium with a patient expression, like a teacher deciding whether a child deserved discipline or pity. Then she changed the room against him. She did not mention invoices. She did not mention the dock road. She spoke about disruption, unpaid penalties, deteriorating property, and one homeowner's inability to accept the responsibilities of living in an elevated community. She made Ethan sound reckless, without ever calling him poor, unstable, without ever calling him dangerous, and unfit, without ever saying the word out loud. People shifted in their chairs. Some looked at him with sympathy, some with fear, some with the exhausted discomfort of people who wanted the truth, but did not want trouble sitting near them. Lily's face burned red in the back row. Ethan saw her grip the archive folder so tightly the cardboard bent under her fingers. Mason leaned close as if telling her not to move, but she was staring at Marjorie with the stunned hurt of a child realizing adults could lie beautifully in public. Ethan sat back down because he would not give Marjorie the satisfaction of making him look like the angry man she had just described. But inside, something old and stubborn shifted into place. His father had taught him that rotten wood rarely looks rotten on the surface. You find it by pressing where someone painted too carefully. Then Nora stood. It happened so quietly that half the room missed it at first. One moment, she was a shadow near the back wall, and the next, she was walking toward the center aisle, face pale, hands trembling, every step seeming to cost her more than the last. Marjorie's eyes snapped toward her before anyone else understood the danger. Nora reached the side microphone and touched it with 2 fingers, as if the metal were hot. Her voice shook, but it carried. She said she could no longer serve as treasurer. She said she could not continue signing reports she no longer believed were true. She said every family in that room deserved records that matched reality. The silence that followed was so complete, Ethan could hear rain beginning against the windows. Marjorie moved fast. Her hand struck a switch near the podium, and Nora's microphone went dead with a small electric pop. The room flinched. Marjorie's smile returned too quickly, stretched too tightly, and she told everyone Nora had been under personal stress, that financial work was demanding, that misunderstandings could happen when people became overwhelmed. She said it with the gentle cruelty of someone wrapping a blade in silk. Nora stood in the aisle with no working microphone, humiliated and shaking, while 2 board members hurried toward her as if she were the problem and not the woman who had just silenced her. That was the moment the room changed. Mrs. Harlan slowly rose from her chair, not speaking, just standing beside her cane with the folded fine in her hand. Ray McAvoy uncrossed his arms. A young mother pulled her children closer.
And somewhere in the back, Mason whispered something to Lily, who opened the archive folder and stared at a black and white photograph inside it like it had suddenly become a weapon. The meeting ended early, not officially, but in the way controlled things collapse when too many people feel the floor move under them. Marjorie announced a private board review, reminded residents that rumors could harm property values, and walked out through the side door with her chin high and her pink suit untouched. But Ethan saw her hand tighten around the edge of her folder until the paper bent. Outside, the parking lot shimmered under rain and streetlights. People avoided each other's eyes, then looked anyway. Everyone wanted to ask the same question, but no one wanted to be the first to say it where Marjorie's allies might hear. Ethan drove home with Lily beside him, both of them quiet. She finally opened the school archive folder on her lap and showed him an old photograph from 1978. A summer picnic by the dock road. Dozens of families walking freely along the gravel path Marjorie had chained shut. On the back, in faded blue ink, someone had written, "Harbor Pines Public Landing, July 4th. Ethan felt the picture like a match struck in a dark room. If that road had been public before the HOA existed, Marjorie had not just locked him out. She had been using a public right-of-way as a weapon. The workshop was dark when they pulled in, except for one thin line of light beneath the side door. Ethan told Lily to stay in the truck. He moved through the rain slowly, listening to the familiar creak of wet boards, the hollow tap of water dripping from the roof, the low groan of the harbor wind pushing against the walls. Inside, Nora Ellis stood beside his workbench, soaked through, hair stuck to her cheeks, a silver USB drive pressed in her palm. She looked smaller than she had at the meeting, stripped of title, stripped of protection, carrying the kind of fear that makes a person seem older in a single night. She placed the drive on the workbench between them. No speech, no dramatic confession, just a shaking breath and the weight of what she had brought. Ethan did not reach for it right away. He looked at Nora, and in her face he saw guilt, exhaustion, and a desperate need for someone to believe she had not meant to help harm the very people she was supposed to protect. When she finally spoke, she admitted she had signed too many reports without asking enough questions. She had trusted Marjorie's explanations, ignored charges that felt wrong, told herself leadership knew things she did not. But after the invoices, after the threats against her son, after the photo of Caleb in that envelope, she could not stay silent without becoming part of it. Ethan's anger softened, but it did not disappear. He told her that if those files proved what she thought they proved, this would not end with whispered apologies in a workshop. People had lost savings, dignity, access to their own shoreline. His daughter had watched a woman threaten their home in broad daylight. If Nora wanted to make it right, she would have to stand in the open when the time came. Nora closed her eyes, like the words hurt because they were fair. Then Ethan plugged the USB into an old laptop on the bench. The screen lit their faces blue. Folders opened one by one. Bank statements, invoices, contractor payments, scanned receipts, delivery photos. The numbers climbed so fast, they stopped feeling like money and started feeling like a crime scene. Imported kitchen cabinets, heated bathroom flooring, custom stonework, designer lighting. The descriptions all used community language, but the delivery address kept repeating with brutal clarity. 19 Harbor Ridge Lane, Marjorie Blake residence. Ethan stared at the screen until the rain outside seemed to vanish. Lily appeared in the doorway behind him, disobeying his order to stay in the truck, the 1978 doc photograph still in her hand. Nora saw the girl, saw the old picture, saw the laptop screen, and understood at the same time Ethan did. Marjorie was not just stealing money. She was building power with it,
turning community fear into marble floors and locked roads. Then the laptop pinged with a new email from the HOA server, sent to every resident in Seabrook Cove. Ethan opened it, and the workshop went silent. Effective immediately, Ethan Walker's property is recommended for enforcement seizure due to repeated hostility, unpaid violations, and threat to community stability. Vote scheduled in 72 hours. At 2:13 in the morning, Ethan woke to the sound of metal tearing away from wood. It was not loud at first, just a scraping groan beneath the rain, the kind of sound an old house makes when the wind gets into loose boards. Then came the crack of screws being ripped from the front of his workshop, and when Ethan reached the window, he saw two dark figures under the security light, carrying away the hand-painted sign his father had hung there 30 years ago. He ran outside barefoot over wet gravel, shouting into the cold, but the figures were already climbing into a pickup with no plates visible, the old sign shoved into the truck bed like trash. Walker Boatworks had been painted across that board in faded navy letters, each one brushed by his father's hand the year Ethan turned 10. By the time the truck vanished down Salt Lantern Road, Ethan was standing in the rain with splinters at his feet, staring at the blank rectangle above the workshop door where his family name used to be. Lily appeared on the porch behind him in a sweatshirt too big for her, her face white with sleep and fear, and Ethan understood exactly what Marjorie wanted. She was not just trying to take the house. She was trying to erase the man who belonged to it. By sunrise, another envelope was waiting in the mailbox. This one came from a law office 2 towns over, thick and formal, accusing Ethan of defaming Marjorie Blake, damaging the reputation of Seabrook Cove, and spreading false allegations about association funds. Stapled behind it was a new violation notice: industrial noise, unapproved commercial activity, visual nuisance, and adverse impact on neighborhood peace. The fine was smaller than the first one, but crueler somehow, because it targeted the one place Ethan still felt useful: his workshop, his livelihood, the place where broken boats became seaworthy again. Nora arrived just after 8, eyes swollen from a night without sleep, with Caleb Brooks beside her, a local attorney in a wrinkled charcoal coat who looked too young to be trusted until he opened his briefcase. Caleb did not waste words. He spread Nora's USB files across Ethan's workbench, lining up bank statements, contractor invoices, delivery notes, and HOA expense reports in rows that made the crime look almost physical. Ethan watched as the numbers connected to addresses, the addresses to vendors, the vendors to permits, and every path seemed to climb the same hill toward Harbor Ridge Lane. The white house above the cove had always looked untouchable from below. Marjorie's home sat behind black iron gates and trimmed hedges, its windows catching the morning sun while the rest of Harbor Pines woke under fog. Ethan had driven past it for years without caring what kind of floors it had or what kind of lights glowed behind the glass. Now Caleb's finger moved from invoice to invoice, and the house stopped being a house. It became a receipt. New roof, paid as clubhouse maintenance. Imported Italian kitchen, coded as hospitality upgrade. Marble bathroom, filed under meeting room renovation. Radiant floor heating, listed as common area infrastructure. A glass greenhouse facing the water, described as environmental beautification. The total passed $480,000 before Caleb stopped counting out loud. Nora sat on a stool near the back of the workshop, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Every number seemed to hit her like a confession. She whispered that she had seen reports, not deliveries, summaries, not rooms, signatures, not proof. Ethan wanted to be angry at her, and part of him was, but when he looked at her face, he saw a woman who had spent years mistaking fear for loyalty and was only now learning the cost. Caleb's voice cut through the silence with the first solid shape of hope. This was not just misuse of funds. If Marjorie had altered bylaws, manufactured authority, and used false records to threaten liens, they were looking at civil fraud, possible forgery, and a board action built on poisoned paper. Then Nora found the file that changed the air in the room. It was a scanned amendment to the HOA bylaws, supposedly granting the board expanded power to fine, restrict access, and initiate seizure recommendations for properties deemed harmful to community value. The document carried signatures from a community vote 3 years earlier, but Nora stared at one name, then another, and began shaking her head. 2 homeowners listed on the signature page had moved away before the vote. One had died 6 months earlier. Another signature belonged to Mrs. Harlan, who had been in the hospital recovering from a stroke that week.
Caleb took the page from her slowly, holding it by the corner as if it were evidence from a fire. The authority Marjorie had used to chain the dock road, threaten Ethan's home, and bleed residents through fines may never have legally existed. While the adults stared at the forged amendment, Lily and Mason were at Harbor Pines Middle School, kneeling on the floor of a storage room that smelled like dust, glue, and old paper. Their history teacher had unlocked the archive cabinet after Lily showed her the 1978 dock photograph. Box by box, the children pulled out yearbooks, town newsletters, and curled maps of the shoreline from before the luxury homes appeared. Mason found it first. A faded planning map marked Public Landing Road, the same road Marjorie had chained shut. Lily found 3 photographs after that, each one showing community picnics, lobster crates, children on bicycles, fishermen walking freely toward the dock. She photographed every page with her school tablet, hands trembling not from fear now, but from the strange power of proof. On the way home, Mason saw the delivery truck. It was parked halfway inside Marjorie's gate, its rear doors open, 2 workers unloading long wooden crates stamped with the name of the same Portland design company from Nora's invoices. Mason did not think like an adult yet, which was why he did not talk himself out of doing the brave thing. He crouched behind a stone wall slick with moss, lifted his phone, and recorded the truck, the crates, the workers, the white house, and the gleaming greenhouse frame rising behind it like a secret made of glass. When one worker turned toward him, Mason dropped flat into the wet leaves, holding his breath until the truck engine started again. That evening, Ethan sat alone in the workshop after everyone had gone. The stolen sign was gone, the fines were growing, and Caleb had been honest about the cost of fighting. Retainers. Filings, emergency motions, investigators. Ethan opened the folder where he kept business papers and saw the bank notice he had been avoiding. If he sold the workshop equipment, he might buy enough time to fight for the house. If he kept the shop alive, Marjorie might take both. The choice sat in front of him like a blade with no safe handle. Lily found him there, sitting under the bare place where the sign used to hang. She did not offer comfort the way adults do, with sentences polished smooth and useless. She set the old public road map beside his hand, then placed Mason's video open on the phone next to it. On the screen, Marjorie's white house glowed above the cove, while men unloaded expensive materials paid for by people who were being fined for sunflowers and bicycles. Lily's voice was small, but it did not break. She said her grandfather would never let a woman in a pink suit steal the whole harbor. Ethan looked at his daughter, at the map, at the video, at the place where his father's sign had been torn away. Something inside him that had almost collapsed began to stand back up. Then Caleb called. His voice was low, urgent, and stripped of every calm thing he had brought into the workshop that morning. Marjorie had filed an emergency petition. Not just fines now, not just a lien. She was asking the court to approve temporary control of Ethan's property before the 72-hour HOA vote, claiming he was destroying records, intimidating residents, and operating an unsafe industrial site beside family homes. The hearing was at 9 the next morning, and attached to her petition was a photograph of Ethan standing in the rain beside his damaged workshop, framed to make it look like he had torn down his own sign. The courthouse did not save Ethan that morning, but it bought him 72 hours. Caleb Brooks walked out under a flat, gray sky with a temporary order in one hand and rain on his coat, his face tight with the kind of victory that still felt like bleeding.
Marjorie had not gotten control of Ethan's property, not yet. But the judge had allowed the HOA vote to proceed, and by sunset, every resident in Seabrook Cove had received a notice for an emergency meeting that would decide whether Ethan Walker was a danger to the community or the first person brave enough to tell the truth. By 6:30 that evening, the Seabrook Cove Community Hall was packed so tightly the windows had fogged from the inside. Folding chairs scraped against the floor, children sat on their parents' coats near the walls, and older residents leaned on canes in the aisles because no one wanted to miss what had stopped feeling like a meeting and started feeling like a trial. The room smelled of wet wool, coffee, and fear. Ethan stood near the back with Lily beside him, her archive folder pressed flat against her chest, while Mason waited near the projector table with both hands tucked under his sleeves to hide how badly they were shaking. Nora sat 2 rows from the front, pale but upright, a binder of statements resting on her knees like it weighed more than she did. Then Marjorie Blake arrived. The side door opened, and every conversation thinned into silence. She stepped into the room in a bright pink suit that seemed almost violent beneath the white lights, her short white hair brushed perfectly smooth, her pearl earrings flashing as she moved toward the podium with the confidence of someone walking onto a stage she believed she owned. 2 board members followed her, each carrying files, each avoiding the eyes of the residents they had helped intimidate for years. Marjorie set both hands on the podium, smiled at the packed room, and began with the same polished calm that had frightened people into obedience for so long. She called the accusations a smear campaign. She called Ethan a disgruntled tradesman who could not accept basic standards. She called Nora confused, emotional, and unfit to manage financial duties. Ethan felt Lily stiffen beside him. He did not move. Caleb had told him that the first person to lose control would lose the room, and Marjorie was counting on anger. So Ethan waited, while she painted him as bitter, unstable, and desperate, while she described the old workshop as a nuisance and the Walker house as a declining property threatening everyone's investment. Faces turned toward him, some doubtful, some ashamed, some searching for permission to stop being afraid. He could feel the whole room leaning toward a decision it did not yet understand. Caleb stepped forward first. No drama, no shouting. Just a folder opened beneath the projector camera, and a stack of documents placed where everyone could see them. The screen behind Marjorie changed from the HOA logo to bank statements, vendor receipts, and delivery invoices. A murmur moved through the hall. Caleb traced the first payment with his finger. Clubhouse roof repair, charged to Seabrook Cove, delivered to 19 Harbor Ridge Lane. Then another. Hospitality cabinetry, charged to the HOA, delivered to 19 Harbor Ridge Lane. Then Italian kitchen fixtures, marble tile, radiant floor heating, custom greenhouse glass, all dressed up in community language, all climbing the same hill to Marjorie's white house. Marjorie's smile did not disappear all at once. It failed in pieces. First the corners of her mouth, then the stillness in her eyes, then the smooth authority in her posture. She interrupted, saying accounting classifications could be misunderstood by people without board experience, but the words landed weaker than she expected. People were already whispering numbers. Mrs. Harlan leaned forward with one hand on her cane. Ray McAvoy looked like he was fighting the urge to stand. A young mother near the aisle began crying quietly, not from sadness, but from the sudden realization that every late fee she had paid, every grocery bill she had stretched, every apology she had made to Marjorie, had gone into someone else's kitchen. Nora rose next. The room did not breathe. She walked to the front with her binder pressed to her chest, passing Marjorie without looking at her. Her hands trembled when she opened the first page, but her voice held. She showed the emails, not summaries, not rumors, not interpretations. Marjorie's own instructions appeared on the screen, directing Nora to list private renovation charges as community presentation expenses, to divide large payments across multiple categories, to delay questions until after fee increases were approved. Marjorie lunged toward the podium controls, but Caleb blocked the panel with one hand, and for the first time in years, someone physically stood between her and the switch. Marjorie turned on Nora with a look so cold, it made several people gasp. She accused her of incompetence, betrayal, and falsifying records to hide her own mistakes. Nora flinched, and Ethan saw the old fear return to her face. For a second, it looked like she might fold. Then she reached into the binder and pulled out the cream-colored envelope Marjorie had used to threaten her son. She set the photos on the table for everyone to see. The room changed again, deeper this time, uglier. It was no longer just money. It was intimidation. It was power used against children. It was the moment people stopped wondering whether Marjorie had crossed a line and started realizing there had never been a line she respected. From the back of the hall, Lily stepped toward the projector with Mason beside her.
Ethan almost reached for her, but she was already moving, small and steady under all those adult eyes. She placed the old photographs under the camera, one by one. The public dock road in 1978, the July 4th picnic, fishermen carrying traps, children riding bicycles along the same gravel path now chained shut by order of the HOA. Mason added the map marked Public Landing Road, then his phone video of the delivery truck at Marjorie's gate, crates stamped with the same company name listed in the fake clubhouse invoices. When the video showed the White House on Harbor Ridge and the men unloading materials through the side entrance, a sound rose from the crowd that was not quite a shout yet, but something more dangerous. Recognition. Then Mason took the microphone. He was barely tall enough to adjust it, and his voice shook so badly at first that people leaned in to hear him. He told them about his grandmother being fined for sunflowers after her husband died, how she cut them down herself before dawn because she was embarrassed, how she cried in the kitchen over a bill that cost more than her medicine that month. No one moved. Even Ethan felt his throat tighten. The room had heard numbers, invoices, bylaws, and legal arguments, but this was the part that broke through. This was what Marjorie's system had done to people when nobody was recording. A man near the center row stood up slowly. His face was red, his jaw trembling. He asked the question that cracked the whole meeting open. If all that money had been spent on a clubhouse, where was the clubhouse? For 1 second, the hall was silent enough to hear the rain sliding down the windows. Then it erupted. People stood, shouted, demanded answers, held up their own fines, their own dues notices, their own private humiliations. Marjorie tried to reclaim the podium, but the room no longer belonged to her. Her pink suit, so commanding an hour earlier, now looked almost absurd against the storm of faces she had underestimated. The double doors opened at the back. 2 Harbour Pines police officers entered first, followed by a county financial investigator carrying a sealed folder. Caleb did not look surprised. He had filed everything before the meeting began. The officers moved down the aisle while Marjorie stood frozen at the podium, her face draining of color beneath the makeup, one hand still gripping the microphone, as if authority could be held by force. The investigator read from the folder, citing suspected embezzlement, falsified records, intimidation, and misuse of association funds. The room fell silent again, but this silence was different. This was the sound of power leaving one body and returning to 300 witnesses. When they took Marjorie by the arm, she did not fight. She lifted her chin, trying to preserve the last inch of dignity she had not stolen from someone else. As they led her past Ethan, her perfume cut through the damp air one final time. She looked at him with pale, furious eyes and said he had destroyed the community. Ethan looked past her, at Nora standing through her shame, at Lily holding the old dock photograph, at Mason wiping his eyes beside his grandmother, at neighbors finally seeing one another clearly. "No," he said. "We took it back." And as Marjorie was led out into the rain, the emergency vote notice still sat on the front table, unsigned,
untouched, and suddenly meaningless. The chain came down on a cold Saturday morning, but no one cheered at first. Ethan stood at the edge of Public Landing Road with bolt cutters in his hands, watching the rusted links fall into the gravel like something dead finally letting go. For a few seconds, the whole crowd stayed silent, as if Seabrook Cove did not yet trust freedom when it appeared in daylight. The harbor was silver under the early sun. Fog lifted slowly from the water, curling around the old dock pilings and drifting past the boats like breath from another time. Mrs. Harlan stood near the front with Mason beside her, her sunflower scarf bright against her dark coat. Ray McAvoy held a folded flag under one arm. Nora Ellis stood near the back, not hiding anymore, but not standing proudly either. She looked like someone still learning how to be seen after years of looking down. The investigation had moved fast after the night Marjorie Blake was led out of the community hall. County financial officers froze the HOA accounts before dawn. Search warrants followed. By the end of the week, the White House on Harbor Ridge was no longer a symbol of power. It was evidence. Investigators photographed the Italian kitchen, the marble bathroom, the heated floors, the greenhouse facing the sea. Every beautiful surface paid for with money taken from people who had been fined for flowers, flags, bicycles, and old boats. Marjorie was charged with embezzlement, falsifying association records, intimidation, and abuse of HOA authority. Her lawyers tried to call it poor accounting. The invoices called it something else. The delivery records called it something else. Nora's emails, Mason's video, Lily's photographs, and Caleb's filings made the truth too heavy to move. Her newly remodeled mansion was placed under seizure proceedings to repay the residents. The fines were voided. The fake bylaw amendment was thrown out. And the lien thread against Ethan's home disappeared from the county records as if a dark hand had finally been lifted from the page. Still, victory did not feel simple. Ethan expected relief to arrive like sunlight, but it came slowly, in pieces. It came when Lily slept through the night for the first time in weeks. It came when a customer parked outside Walker Boatworks and asked him to repair an old skiff because he wanted to support the man who had stood up to Marjorie. It came when Ethan climbed a ladder and hung a new sign above the workshop door, carved from cedar, the letters painted by Lily in the same navy blue his father had used years before. Nora did not ask to be forgiven. That was what made people listen when she stood before the newly elected board and admitted what she had missed, what she had signed, and what fear had cost the whole community. She did not return as treasurer. Not yet. Instead, she helped build the system that would keep another Marjorie from ever happening again. Every monthly expense would be posted online. Every contract would require open review. Every board member would face term limits. Every year, an outside audit would be mandatory. The first time the new financial page went live, residents sat at kitchen tables across Seabrook Cove and refreshed their screens like they were watching a door unlock. Ethan refused the presidency 3 times before the community stopped asking. He did not want a title, a podium, or a key to the HOA office. He wanted his home quiet again. He wanted Lily laughing in the kitchen. He wanted to smell cedar shavings instead of legal paper. But when the residents asked him to serve as a temporary community advisor for 6 months, he looked at Nora, then at Mrs. Harlan, then at the dock road he had almost lost, and agreed. Not because he trusted authority, but because he now understood what happened when good people left power unattended. The work on the dock began the following weekend. No contractor arrived with polished trucks and hidden invoices. Residents showed up with hammers, work gloves, thermoses of coffee, and casseroles wrapped in foil. Ray rewired the safety lights. Ethan replaced rotten planks. Nora labeled donation receipts at a folding table. Mrs. Harlan brought sunflower seeds for a new planter near the road sign. Mason filmed the repairs for the school archive, while Lily arranged old photographs on a display board titled "The Keepers of the Landing." Her exhibit stretched along the dock railing on the day of the reopening. There was Ethan's father, standing beside a half-built skiff. They were fishermen unloading traps. Children riding bicycles on Public Landing Road. A 4th of July picnic from 1978. A recent photo of the rusted chain lying in the gravel.
And beside it, one final picture taken after the meeting. Neighbors standing together in the rain, while Marjorie's empty podium sat behind them.
People stopped in front of that photo longer than the others, maybe because it showed the exact moment fear changed sides. When the ribbon was finally tied across the dock entrance, Lily and Mason stood together to cut it. Mason looked nervous until his grandmother touched his shoulder. Lily glanced at Ethan, and for one impossible second, he saw his father's stubbornness in her face. The scissors closed. The ribbon fell. This time, the crowd did cheer, loud enough to send gulls lifting from the pilings and scatter silver ripples across the cove. That evening, long tables were set along the shoreline. Children ran between folding chairs. Someone played an old guitar near the fire pit. Mrs. Harlan handed out packets of sunflower seeds like party favors.
Nora sat with her son beneath a string of warm lights, both of them smiling carefully, as if happiness was something they were allowed to try again. Residents who had once avoided each other in the mail center now passed plates, told stories, apologized, laughed, and said each other's names. Ethan walked to the entrance of the dock just after sunset and fastened the last piece of wood into place. It was a small cedar sign, carved by hand in his workshop, the edges still smelling faintly of oil and sawdust. Lily held the lantern while he tightened the screws. When he stepped back, the words glowed in the amber light. Community is not built by rules. It is built by trust. Across the water, Harbor Ridge was dark. Marjorie's white mansion no longer shone above the cove. The pink suit that had once made rooms go quiet had become nothing more than a warning parents told their children when explaining why no one should ever be too powerful to question. Ethan looked down the open dock, then back at the house his father built, still standing, still weathered, still his. Lily slipped her hand into his. For the first time in months, he did not feel like he was guarding what remained. He felt like they had finally come home. The lesson of this story is simple. A community is only strong when people are willing to ask questions, protect one another, and stand up when something feels wrong. In everyday life, trust matters, but blind trust can be dangerous. Sometimes one honest voice, one brave witness, or one small piece of proof can help many people find the courage to speak the truth. If this story moved you, please share your thoughts in the comments, share the video with someone who might enjoy it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. May God bless you and your family, and may He protect every honest person watching today.